They say family is where you're always welcome. But what if the welcome mat slowly fades? Until one day, you realize you're just another piece of furniture in your own child's house. My name is Amanda. I'm 64 years old. And for 7 years I gave my life to raising my grandson. Every bottle, every bedtime story, every fevered night. I wasn't looking for praise. Just showed up. But when my daughter-in-law smiled politely and said, "We think it's time for our own space," I understood what she really meant. They didn't need me anymore. Not as a mother. Not as a grandmother. Just not at all. What they didn't know was that I had one thing left. Plan. And it started with silence. That afternoon I didn't cry. I walked into my room, folded my clothes slowly into a bag, and left the apron I'd worn for 7 years on the kitchen chair, still warm from dinner. I moved into a dusty motel with walls the color of old lemons. Sleep didn't come that night. But something else did. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about being pushed out. It was about waking up and realizing I'd been asleep in someone else's life for far too long. This is the story of how I turned that moment into a mission. How I came back not as the maid, but as the matriarch they never saw coming. For 7 straight years, I was the quiet rhythm in the background of my grandson's life. I didn't need applause. I didn't ask for thanks. I was just there, day after day, holding him through fevers, tying his little shoes, singing lullabies into the dark when nightmares came knocking. First it felt like love, like purpose, and maybe that was enough, for a while. But there comes a moment, slow and creeping, when the house you help build no longer feels like home. When thank you becomes rare and "can you just help with one more thing?" becomes routine. You're not seen as someone who gives, but someone who should. You're no longer Amanda, the mother, the woman, the person. You're grandma on call, the second shift, the one who always says yes. And the hardest part, no one even notices you've disappeared. I still remember the night Tyler had a fever so high. I sat by his crib with a cold rag, praying in silence until morning. And then, just a week later, Jenny, my daughter-in-law, told me I forgot to rinse the spinach properly. As if that's who I was now. A woman who couldn't even wash vegetables right. You see, there's a common mistake we women make, especially mothers. We give, and give, and give without setting boundaries. 'Cause we think love means saying yes. We think love means sacrifice no matter the cost. But here's the truth. Love without boundaries becomes expectation. And expectation without appreciation turns into quiet erasure. That's what I learned. I wasn't just invisible. I had helped them make me invisible. Because I thought if I loved hard enough, they'd never forget me. But they did. They didn't even say goodbye. That was the day I realized. Love can't be the only thing you bring to the table. You have to bring yourself too. And protect her. And that realization was the beginning of the end. Or rather, the beginning of something much better. It didn't come with shouting, or slammed doors, or even a raised eyebrow. No. The moment I was pushed out of their lives came wrapped in polite words and soft tones. Like a lullaby with a hidden knife. "We just feel like it's time for our own space," Jenny had said one evening after dinner. Jason nodded, not meeting my eyes. "Tyler's getting older. We think it would be good for him to develop independence." Independence. What a clean little word. What a perfect coat of paint to hide what they really meant. We don't need you anymore. There was no thank you for the sleepless nights. No gratitude for the birthday cakes I baked from scratch. No recognition for the 7 years I shaped their child's early world. We need space. And like that I was out. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I went back to my room, packed a small suitcase, and placed my worn apron on the kitchen table like a folded flag at a quiet funeral. And here's the thing that stings the most. It wasn't just the leaving. It was realizing that my presence had become a transaction. As long as I was useful, cleaning, cooking, babysitting, I was tolerated. But the moment I needed space or rest, or simply a chair to sit in without being asked to make myself useful, I was too much. It's a story I've seen play out in too many homes, especially for women my age. We give because we love. They take because they can. And then one day, the giving becomes expected. And the love, it's just a footnote, if it's there at all. That motel room I moved into wasn't just small. It was quiet, not peaceful, just hollow. Because when love is reduced to a service, silence feels like being fired from your own life. I lay awake that night, staring at the yellowed ceiling and wondering, how did I get here? How did I go from mom and grandma to a problem that needed to be moved out quietly? And then I realized, I hadn't just been evicted from their home. I had been evicted from their hearts. Long ago. That's when something inside me clicked. This wasn't sadness anymore. It was clarity. I wasn't going to beg for space in a family I helped build. And I wasn't going to fund their convenience ever again. Because what they didn't know was that I had just begun writing a brand new chapter. And it started with a single call to someone who still remembered who I was, before they made me forget. The motel room smelled like old lemon soap and regret. Its walls were thin, painted beige but stained by time, and the mattress squeaked every time I exhaled too deeply. There was a flickering ceiling light, a chipped mirror, and a chair too stiff to rest in. I'd sold my apartment years ago when Jason and Jenny asked me to move in and help raise Tyler. "We'll be together," they said. "You'll never have to be alone." So I gave up my space, my little nest, for the promise of something warmer. But now that promise had expired. And I was here, between places, between versions of myself. I wasn't going home. 'Cause I didn't know where that was anymore. That first night at the motel, I didn't cry. I just sat there in the dark, hands in my lap, wondering how a woman could give her entire adult life to a family and still end up with no one asking if she had dinner. And here's the painful truth I had to learn. When you give everything without boundaries, you may one day find yourself with nothing to return to. There was no celebration for my years of service. No "we'll miss you," just quiet. It reminded me of a story I once read, about a lighthouse keeper who stayed at his post for 20 years, making sure ships could find their way. When he retired, no one sent a thank you. The ocean didn't even notice, just kept moving. That's how it felt. But something shifted when I picked up the phone and dialed my sister Nancy. We hadn't spoken in years. Not because of any fight, just the distance life tends to place between people who once shared bunk beds and hairbrushes. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy but unmistakably hers. And when I finally spoke, stammering through tears I didn't know I was holding, she didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She simply said, "Come home, Amanda. We'll figure it out. Together." That was the first time I heard the word home and believed it again. You see, sometimes the people who help us the most aren't the ones who shared our blood, but the ones who remember our spirit, when we've forgotten it ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, that tiny motel room wasn't nowhere after all. It was a waiting room for the life I was finally brave enough to begin. The next morning I packed my things. I didn't return to my old apartment. I called a real estate agent instead. Because selling it wasn't letting go of the past. It was the first step toward owning my future. Nancy didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. She heard my voice, cracked and trembling through the phone line, and that was enough. "Pack your bags, Amanda. Come home." I hadn't seen her in over 3 years. Life, like it often does, got in the way. Birthdays missed, holidays reduced to text messages, and phone calls replaced by good intentions that never made it to the dial pad. But when I stepped off that bus into her small pine-scented town, there she was, hands stuffed in her coat pockets, smile wide as the sky, like not a single minute had passed. She wrapped me in a hug that didn't ask, "What happened?" Simply said, "I remember who you are. And I've got you." That's the thing about sisters, real sisters. They don't just remember your favorite color. They remember you even when the world forgets. Her house was a cozy 2-story cabin with chipped shutters and the faint smell of tomato soup lingering in the kitchen. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of intention. Everything had its place. Every room had her warmth. And for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't expected to earn my keep. She didn't hand me a chore list. She handed me a mug of tea, a thick blanket, and said, "Rest. No one's watching." And that changed everything. You see, one of the greatest gifts we can receive, especially after being unseen for so long, is someone who sees us clearly and doesn't flinch. I told her everything. How Jason and Jenny slowly erased me with polite smiles. How even Tyler, my sweet grandson, was being used as a messenger for manipulation. How I stood in the kitchen like a ghost in my own story. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. Then, with a calm rage only a big sister could muster, said, "If they ever try to do that to you again, they'll have to go through me first." We laughed, then cried, then laughed again. That night, we sat on her back porch, peeling green beans under a sky littered with stars. And somewhere between the snap of each pod and the creak of the old rocking chairs, I felt something loosen in my chest. For the first time in years, I was safe. And that's the power of one person who sees you. It doesn't take a crowd. It doesn't take a speech. Just one voice, steady and kind, saying, "You are not too much. You are not a burden. You matter." And from that one voice, a plan began to grow. Not to go back with an open heart, but to go back with a firm spine. And a new kind of clarity. A few days later, I made one more call. To a real estate agent. Because I wasn't going back to depend on anyone. I was going back on my own 2 feet. There's a strange kind of silence in an empty apartment. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that echoes with everything you once were. I hadn't stepped foot in that place for years. Not since I gave it up to move in with Jason and Jenny. Back then it was an easy decision. "Come live with us, Mom. You shouldn't be alone." So I locked the door behind me and handed over the keys, thinking I'd never need them again. But here I was now, standing in the same doorway. Only this time I wasn't coming back to reclaim something. I was here to let it go. The curtains were still there. The pale blue ones my late husband and I picked out during our second spring together. The floor creaked in all the same places. There was dust on the shelves, and yet somehow the memories were still fresh. Like warm bread that lingers even after the oven's gone cold. But something had changed. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a room I used to know. In a life that no longer fit. And so, I called the real estate agent. He was young, polite, and efficient. He looked around and said, "Great location, quiet building, should move fast." I nodded, signing the listing papers with a hand that barely trembled. Because deep down I knew. This wasn't a loss. It was a release. You see, we often attach our worth to places. To bricks and walls and photo frames. But a home is only as safe as the love that lives inside it. And that love. It had been packed away long ago. By selling the apartment, I wasn't erasing my memories. I was freeing myself from a past that had begun to weigh me down. Like a backpack filled with beautiful stones I could no longer carry. The sale went through faster than I expected. A young couple bought it, newly married, excited to start fresh. And I smiled as I handed over the keys. Because beginnings and endings, they often share the same door. With the money from the sale, I opened a quiet bank account. I split the funds carefully. Some for living, some locked in long-term safety. And I didn't tell Jason. I didn't tell Jenny. Not out of spite. But because, for the first time in years, I was building something for me. That was my lesson. Love is not a retirement plan. And sacrifice is not a savings account. Can give, yes. But we must never give away the ground beneath our feet. And with that I was ready. Not to go back as a caregiver. But as a woman who had relearned her value. The next step. Back to their doorstep. Only this time I wasn't bringing cookies or casseroles. I was bringing a contract. And a spine they weren't expecting. Before we go on, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from something or someone you once called home? Was it freeing? Was it painful? Maybe both. Drop a comment below and tell me. What did letting go teach you? Your story might just help someone. The last time I stood at Jason and Jenny's door, I had a pie in one hand, and hope in the other. This time, all I carried was a small suitcase, and a quiet, unshakable resolve. Jenny opened the door with a smile that was too wide to be real. "Oh, Amanda, you're finally here. Come in, come in. Tyler's been talking about you non-stop." Jason hovered behind her, nodding like someone trying too hard to act natural. They offered me the couch. Again, neatly folded blankets, a pillow with a cute little phrase stitched on it. "Love makes a house a home." Smiled politely. "Thank you," I said. "But I was thinking, there's a small motel just down the road. I'd be more comfortable there. I get up a few times a night, and I wouldn't want to disturb your sleep." The room fell quiet just for a second, because they knew what that meant. No more controlling the narrative. No more guilt tripping me into chores or favors. If I wasn't under their roof, I wasn't under their thumb. And then I made my second move. I smiled just as sweetly and said, "Only thing is, I didn't bring much cash. Meals, the motel. We'll need to sort that." Jason's face twitched like a man who suddenly realized he was holding the wrong cards. Jenny's smile cracked around the edges, but they paid. 'Cause they had to. That night in my little motel room, windows clean, bed soft, silence mine, I made a call to Nancy. "Step 1 complete," I told her. You see, this wasn't about revenge. Not in the petty sense. This was about accountability. About standing in the same space where I'd once been invisible. And making sure they saw me now. Because here's the truth. When people reduce you to a role, maid, grandma, caretaker, they forget you're a person. And the only way to remind them is to return on your terms, not theirs. So I set boundaries. Clear, simple ones. I told them I would help with Tyler during the day, as agreed. But I wouldn't cook. I wouldn't clean. I wouldn't do laundry. "I'm here as a caregiver," I said. "Not a maid." And with every task I didn't take on, they grew more uncomfortable. Because for the first time, they had to carry the weight they'd always passed to me. That was the lesson. People will treat you the way you teach them to. And I had finally rewritten the syllabus. What they didn't know was that I had one more thing coming. One document that would change the rules completely. A few days later, I slid a folder across their dining table. Inside, a printed work agreement. Because if I was going to care for their child, we were going to treat it like the job they had always taken for granted. I placed the folder gently on the kitchen table. Not with force, not with drama, just quiet certainty. Jenny glanced at it like it might bite. Jason furrowed his brows. "Kylie, what's this?" Smiled. "It's a written agreement. I drafted it last night. Just something simple to make sure we're all clear." Jenny opened the folder and began to read. Her smile faded line by line. "Childcare only. Defined hours. 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. No laundry. No cooking. No errands. Overtime requires prior agreement. Transportation costs reimbursed. 2 rest days per week." There was nothing outrageous. Nothing dramatic. Just structure. The very thing they'd never offered me. Jason finally said, "Do we really need contracts? For family?" I looked at him gently but firmly. "You're asking me to help. And I'm willing. But I'm no longer doing it at the expense of my health, peace, or self-worth. This isn't about money. It's about respect." They went quiet. 'Cause they knew. They knew how much I had done, without ever asking for recognition. And deep down, they knew they had taken advantage of that. You see, there's a belief, especially in families, that if a woman says yes once, she'll keep saying yes forever. But here's the truth. Boundaries don't break relationships. They reveal which ones were real in the first place. It's not unkind to set limits. It's unkind to expect someone to carry more than their share without asking how much it costs them. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't tired anymore. I was awake, aware, and unafraid. In the weeks that followed, I stuck to the agreement. I arrived on time, watched Tyler with love and care, and clocked out with the same precision. I didn't fold laundry when I passed it. I didn't rinse dishes that weren't mine. I didn't flinch when Jenny let out those long, theatrical sighs. Because I had already paid my dues. This time I was protecting what I had left. My peace. My time. And the version of myself I had fought so hard to reclaim. That was the real superpower. Not strength in the loud, dramatic sense. But strength in the quiet, unshakable form that says, I know who I am now. And I won't be erased again. What I didn't expect, though, was how Tyler would begin to notice. Not just what I did, but who I was becoming. And in the days ahead, that would make all the difference. Tyler didn't understand the contract. He didn't know about the boundaries, the quiet shifts in power, or the look his mother gave me every time I chose not to scrub the kitchen sink. But what he did notice was that Grandma wasn't tired anymore. We found our rhythm, just the two of us. Each morning started with a walk to the park, a small sandwich wrapped in wax paper, and a silly story I'd make up as we strolled. One day it was about a squirrel who opened a bakery. The next, a duck who refused to fly south because he liked snow cones too much. Tyler would laugh until his cheeks turned pink. And in those moments, I wasn't a nanny. I wasn't just helping. I was planting something. Not toys, not treats, but values. One day, while we were playing near the sandbox, Tyler asked, Grandma, how do you know so many stories? I smiled and tapped his chest gently. Because I spent a long time listening. And if you listen closely enough to the people around you, they always have something to teach. That afternoon, I showed him how to write a thank you note to the woman at the sandwich shop who always cut his bread into stars. He didn't protest. He didn't roll his eyes. He just wrote, Thank you for the star sandwiches. You make lunch happy. It was simple. It was enough. And that's the thing about raising a child. You don't need to shout to shape them. You just need to be steady and kind and present in the way that matters. Children don't learn from lectures. They learn from how you treat the waitress, how you handle frustration, how you clean up even when no one's watching. And sometimes they learn most from the things you stop doing. I didn't buy Tyler everything he asked for. I didn't jump every time he whined. When he pouted about not getting a new robot toy, I sat down beside him and said gently, Sweetheart, being disappointed is okay. Means you care. But we don't always get everything we want. And that's okay too. He blinked, then nodded. That was it. No tantrum. No drama. Just a seed. Because love without boundaries becomes indulgence. And indulgence, left unchecked, becomes entitlement. But love with guidance, that becomes legacy. And that was the gift I wanted to leave behind. Not folded laundry. Not warm meals. But the quiet compass inside him that says, you are capable. You are kind. And you don't need to earn love. It begins with how you treat others. What I didn't realize was that these little moments, these stories and sandwiches, were starting to shape more than just Tyler. They were reshaping how Jason looked at me. And soon, they'd stir something unexpected in the very people who once took me for granted. The phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon. Tyler's name lit up on the screen. I smiled before I answered. His little voice always had a way of softening even the toughest of days. Grandma. His voice was small, tentative, like he was holding something behind his back. I miss you, he said. I sat down slowly. I miss you too, sweetheart, I replied, keeping my voice steady, even though my heart clenched. There was a pause. Long one. Then came the second part, quiet, rehearsed. Mommy said, if you come back we can go to the fun park. And maybe you could help pay for robot camp. Robot camp. $5,000. The number had been floating in the air for weeks, like a balloon no one wanted to admit was about to pop. I closed my eyes and breathed in through my nose. Because in that moment, I realized what had happened. They didn't just want my help anymore. They wanted my wallet. And they were using the one voice they knew I'd have the hardest time saying no to. It's one thing to be asked for support. It's another to have your love used as leverage. Tyler didn't understand. Of course he didn't. He was just saying the words he'd been taught to say. But the moment felt heavy, like a crossroads I'd stood at before. And this time I knew I couldn't take the same path. So I answered gently, "Sweetheart, Grandma loves you very much. But do you know what love really means? It means telling the truth. And the truth is, robot camp is something Mommy and Daddy will need to figure out. Not you. Not me." He didn't argue. He just whispered, "Okay." And I knew, somewhere deep in that little heart, something important had just been planted. 'Cause kids know more than we think. They feel when words come from pressure instead of love. And when we protect them from being used, even by the people closest to them, we teach them something powerful. That love doesn't have to be earned with money. And it should never be used as currency. Later that evening, Jason called. There was no warm-up this time. Just, "We were really hoping you could pitch in. It's such a great opportunity for Tyler. And with both of us working." I let him finish. Then I spoke. "Jason," I said softly, "you and Jenny both have good jobs. You bought a new car last month. She's carrying a handbag that costs more than a month at that camp. So if you want this for Tyler, make it happen." Silence. Then the breath of disappointment on the other end of the line. But I didn't flinch. Because I knew something now. Every time you say yes when your heart says no, you trade a little piece of yourself. And I wasn't doing that anymore. That night, I tucked Tyler into bed with a quiet story and a forehead kiss. No guilt. No promises. Just presence. He didn't mention the camp again. And honestly, that was the real win. Because sometimes, the best thing you can give a child isn't what they ask for. It's the quiet courage to say no, so they learn how to say it too. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen with a cup of coffee when Jenny walked in. She didn't speak. Just poured her own mug and stood in silence. And for the first time since I returned, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt like they were finally beginning to understand. I wasn't backing down. The last morning of summer came without fanfare. No goodbye party. No grateful send-off. Just a quiet sunrise filtering through the blinds as I packed my small suitcase, one fold at a time. Tyler was still asleep. I didn't wake him. Instead, I walked into the kitchen, poured myself one last cup of coffee, and left a note by his sketchbook. "If you miss Grandma, draw something and send it to me. Letters last longer than calls." And just like that, I left. No drama. No bitterness. Just peace. Because I wasn't walking away in anger. I was walking home, to the life I had built, the boundaries I had reclaimed, and the self I had quietly stitched back together. Back in Nancy's kitchen days later, I stood in the sunlight as the mailman handed me a thick envelope. There was no return address. But I knew that handwriting. Ugly. Big letters. Crayon smudges along the edges. I opened it slowly, carefully. Inside was a drawing. Tree. Little boy. And a woman in a blue dress holding his hand. At the top, in bright orange letters, "Grandma, are you still making jam?" On the back, "My teacher said to write about the warmest person I know. I wrote about you." I didn't cry. Not this time. I smiled, walked over to the fridge, and pinned the letter with a magnet right between a grocery list and an old photo of me and Nancy at the farmer's market. Because this was legacy. Not money. Not medals. Just quiet love that lasted. Without needing to be loud. You see, we often think legacy is about what we leave behind. But really, it's about who remembers how we made them feel. And I had finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. For needing rest. For saying no. That was my story. Not one of revenge. But of returning to myself. And if you've ever felt used, dismissed, or erased, I hope this reminds you that you can rewrite your own ending. On your terms. With clarity. With calm. And with no apologies. This moment right here. When Amanda sold her apartment, not for anyone else but finally for herself, made us pause. How did it make you feel? Were you angry for her? Proud? Have you ever walked away from a place or a person that once felt like home but no longer held space for you? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. We read every one. Your voice matters here. just like Amanda's finally did. Thank you for listening to Amanda's story. It wasn't just about family or betrayal, it was about boundaries, dignity, and choosing to value yourself, even when others don't. Because sometimes love isn't enough. What we need is respect. And respect starts when we stop asking for permission to matter. What lesson did you take away from Amanda's journey? Leave us a comment. Tell us how her story touched you. And if it reminded you of someone you love or a version of yourself, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. And hey, if you believe in stories that restore, reveal, and remind us of our worth, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more soul-deep storytelling. We'll be here every week with stories that feel like truth.